And we're back. It's episode 3 of AFT Buzz for this season. I'm alongside Matthew Jacobson. What's up, Mike? Or Matt?
I I was gonna say Mike. I am doing fantastic because, buddy, for me it's arena football season's back.
Yeah, and the IFL is shaping up to be real interesting. So it'll be interesting to get into that because I think the playoff picture of what the postseason could be like is really starting to show. But we'll get into that here in a little bit.
Yeah, and considering that a couple of weeks ago we're sitting there trying to figure out what's going on with the West, and we frankly had no idea. It was too early to tell. But obviously, let's go ahead and jump into just some very brief stuff with the Arizona Rattlers to finish off what we were talking about in the last episode. And that's Arizona lost, pretty definitively against Fishers. And, even just from a stats perspective, it's not like the Rattlers played bad. It's just Fishers is very strong. This is probably the best team in the East, in my opinion, so far this
Yeah.
year. But then going back home against San Antonio, that was only San Antonio's second game of the season. So it was way too early to tell what kind of product you're going to see. And it was a pretty definitive Rattlers win, even though it was definitely closer in that first half, being 14-10 Arizona going into halftime. But a 44-31 final, that's a solid win for Arizona. And then last week or this weekend, or previous weekend, however English works, they go up north to Naz and almost the exact same score, 44-32 in that one. San Antonio being 44-31. And now, after a couple of games for the Rattlers, they've won 3 of 4. They are sitting there tied in a three-way tie for the best team in the Western Conference. And correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a couple of weeks. The top 3 teams in the West are still the top 3 teams in the West. The order just changed slightly.
Yeah, I mean you have Arizona, Vegas, and San Diego there, all 3-1. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of shapes out. And Tucson sits below those three at 2-2. But I mean, I also just think the East might also be a stronger conference. You have 4 teams with winning records, and 2 of them are both 4-1. The next one at 3-1 before Jacksonville comes in at 2-1.
And that's literally just because of how scheduling works. Like, Jacksonville and Tulsa have played the fewest amount of games in the East, with 3 games apiece. But, you know, one more game, and let's say Jacksonville wins. Let's just say Jacksonville plays Tulsa. Jacksonville wins, whatever. That's 4 teams that are 3-1
Yeah.
in the East. It is this conference. I don't think it should be surprising, but it kind of feels like it might be, just how strong this conference is this year.
Yeah, it's definitely shaping up to be a very intense, I think, mid-season and into the end of the season. I think it's going to be a very intense finish, and I think we're going to see multiple tight games. I would like to think most of the blowouts we kind of know what those will be now. Obviously Iowa 0-4 and San Antonio and NAZ 0-3 and 0-4. So, and then New Mexico sits at 1-3. But we can't count out Tulsa. I mean, they're 1-2 and they almost beat Orlando. Like that Tulsa team is strong. It's just they're in a loaded Eastern Conference.
Well, yeah, and like I said, and I think it was the first episode, Tulsa could be good this year. Like, East was kind of a toss up, and minus one team in the East, which is Iowa, and I don't want to pick on Iowa, so we're just going to mention them. Minus that one team, every team in the East is at least solid.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think it just goes to show how strong the IFL is and why it is the main major indoor football league, as they call themselves, the major league of indoor football, compared to maybe the talent in the other two leagues. I'm not discounting the NAL and especially not the AF1 because I think the Albany Firebirds could probably hold their own with most of the IFL teams. But it's just I think the competitiveness in those other two aren't as strong. So it'll be interesting to see how things shape up there because I think it just goes to show that players take the IFL more serious a little bit. Management, I mean, the pay is obviously better. So I think people just need to realize that that's why we're also giving this league so much more attention than maybe the other two or three leagues out there.
I know the main reason I give IFL and another league we're going to talk about in a little bit, most of the attention is because, Arizona. I'm definitely hardcore Arizona. But continuing this topic, I do want to bring something up because the West could be a little better than we think it is, just a little bit. So I do want to bring this up because now that we have a decent amount of games to actually go off of, you know, we can actually make a judgment. So obviously, Arizona, Vegas, San Diego, we knew those teams would be better, especially Arizona and Vegas every year. San Diego's had a couple of years where they were really good, a couple of years where they weren't. San Diego, like, I wouldn't call a wild card, but recently it's definitely been more consistently strong. However, the rest of the league, at a glance, Tucson at 500, New Mexico, brand new team at 1-3, and then the winless Gunslingers and Wranglers. Obviously, the Gunslingers haven't exactly been known for being the greatest, and Naz has not been able to figure anything out since I think their third season in the league. But Tucson and New Mexico, very interesting examples for me. I just kind of want to take a moment of your time here. New Mexico's only win came against the Northern Arizona Wranglers at home, and it was a one touchdown differential. It was 47-40. However, the rest of that schedule, and it brings me into Tucson, who I also want to talk about. Tucson has 2 wins, and they're both against New Mexico. And that means I have to try to evaluate New Mexico to see how strong Tucson is right now. And New
Yeah.
Mexico has losses against Tucson, obviously, and Orlando, who are having a great season so far.
Yeah,
They've
they
been
are.
very good. Attendance, or whatever aside, the actual team itself has been good. So then I look at it and I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, if New Mexico is losing to Tucson and they're losing to Orlando, who's Tucson losing to? Tucson lost to San Diego 48-42. If we accept that San Diego is a very good team and they're keeping that within one score, you got to consider that. Obviously, the first
Yeah.
loss was a 21-point loss, versus Vegas, but that makes me wonder, and I want your opinion on this because obviously the East is showing its strength right now.
Yep.
Do you think the West, you're looking at Tucson and New Mexico, because obviously we know San Antonio and Naz aren't very good. These two teams, given the context of their wins and losses, do you think they're stronger than people think that they are? And the Western Conference is stronger than it appears just looking at the stats.
I mean, maybe, but San Diego's 3-1, and they have to prove themselves against Arizona and Vegas. So when you look at Tucson, it's like, okay, can Tucson go and prove themselves against some of the top dogs? I think that's yet to be seen. New Mexico, a little bit more the same case. I don't think New Mexico finishes as well as, say, San Diego or Tucson, but I don't think New Mexico can be counted out because I think this new era, the new Chupacabras era, is definitely something to keep an eye on. It definitely seems like a more exciting team than they were when they were the Duke City Gladiators. So I definitely think there is something to be watched there. But as far as how good they are in the field, I would like to think they're trying, obviously, but I don't think they're going to be up there with San Diego or Tucson. Tucson has shown themselves, like you said. Um, I think they could end up battling for that third spot with San Diego in the end, but only time will tell on that.
And before we leave the IFL, you wanted to talk about the coaches poll, the week 6 coaches poll that just
Yep.
dropped. What is it? Yesterday?
Yeah, I mean it just dropped yesterday, so Tuesday, and the Green Bay Blizzard right up top. I don't blame the coaches there one bit. I think that's fine. I I want them number two just because I think Fishers comes out of the East, and that's not being biased since I'm kind of the beat guy there, but I've seen what Fishers has been capable of this season. But I mean Green Bay is righteously there because they beat Fishers. So Green Bay is going to have that top spot until Fishers can prove them otherwise and beat them again. And then it'll be tied at one. It'll be interesting to see if that happens, what happens there, since that'll be a 1-1 series. But Fishers, I definitely think comes out of the Eastern Conference because I mean they've shown dominance all season, and I think Dixie Wooten has the right resources around him. I mean they are my pick to come out of the Eastern Conference. They just are. I think the Eastern Conference championship game will probably be Fishers and Green Bay. Should the brackets shape up like that?
I think that's fair. I think so far early on that's pretty fair to say. I'm again still going to be pretty interested to see how it continues down the stretch. It's a long season, but I think those are definitely easy picks for the Eastern Conference Championship. But what do you think of the rest of this list? Because a couple of things stuck out, and I want to bring them up. This is not like a oh hey this is an outrage. I just want to ask you what you think. So obviously the Rattlers beat Naz, but their last two wins have come across or come against two of the worst teams in the league. If you look at the coaches poll as well as just the records, so they actually dropped two spots.
Yeah. I
Can you
think that's
explain to
tough
people
because
why that happens?
I mean, I think that's tough because Jacksonville seems to be heating up. I mean, they have a great coach down there, obviously, and things seem to be shaping up for them. Jacksonville's coming off a huge win, and you look at Jacksonville right above Arizona, and then San Diego. I think if there was a way for there to be a tie in the coaches poll, Arizona might be, I don't know, tied for fifth or sixth. But they got absolutely thumped by Fishers. And then, like you said, a couple of their wins have come against worst teams in the league. So I think, unfortunately, for the fans out in Arizona and for the organization, they're kind of where they probably should be in this coaches poll.
But for any Rattlers fans watching or listening, I don't know why I said watching. That doesn't necessarily mean that you know the team is bad or anything. Obviously not. But the next matchup's against Tulsa, who is a decent team, but we still have to see a little more. And then it's at Vegas versus Tucson. They got a couple of matchups, but of their next three games, that's only one big matchup. So it's unfortunately, just from the perspective of a coach's poll, you can't, oh hey, just look at the record. You have to look at the context behind the record. It's going to take another few weeks before the Rattlers can really show what they're made of this
Yeah.
season.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of like I'm kind of talking about how the IFL is really not going to fully shape up for kind of the middle of the pack and maybe the top of the pack until the next, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks go by and we see what Arizona is capable of, as well as Tulsa, maybe even Tucson and Quad City. So it's going to be, I think, very interesting there as far as what those teams will be able to do down the road. It just the scheduling has been obviously maybe not favorable for some, while some have played really tough competition and some have played some weaker competition. So I think it's just the strength of schedule right now. But as we get heading into week 7 and 8 and 9 and all that, I think it'll be even more clear for heading into the postseason.
And before moving on to let you check in with AF1 and NAL before moving on to the brand new league, I want to bring one more bit of context here because there is some, you know, play between the East and West teams, but it's not that heavy. You mostly play your own conference. For
Yeah, exactly.
example, the Rattlers, they went to Fishers. The Rattlers will now host Tulsa and they will host Fishers later. The rest of their schedule, it's all Western Conference. Obviously, you have that IFL Cup, which, I assume they could play, if they win, they could play an Eastern team in that. But, that we're not at that point yet. We could talk about the Cup when it's Cup season. But the rest of the schedule, yeah, unfortunately, if the West keeps shaping up like so far it kind of is, no team in the West, unless you are Vegas, San Diego, or Arizona, or if you're beating those specific teams, are going to be able to truly jump in this coaches poll at this point in the season just because of how the strength of schedule looks.
Yeah, and that's just kind of the way the ball has dropped so far, and I think Cup season will be very indicative of some strength of schedule too. And like you said, and that's what I've noticed too, is how much there's not really any interconference play. And that also makes sense from a financial and travel perspective, is why spend all that money when you have so many opponents in your own conference, obviously. But that also makes it hard for the coaches poll when there's not much interconference play to really see how strong some teams are, like Arizona and Fishers, when those two clashed out here in Indiana.
Yeah. So I basically I just wanted to take a minute to talk about that, where it's like, hey, I know some people might just look at the record and be like, oh, for example, again, coming from an Arizona perspective, I know that fans definitely expect to see them near the top. So it's like you also need to add in the context. You cannot just look at a record blindly and put them up. You have to see who they're beating and how they're beating them.
Exactly. And like I said, I think it's just unfortunate we've not seen much interconference play, but I think it's also a little bit frustrating too when there are some teams at the bottom that honestly are kind of throwing things off just because they're not good and they're getting some better teams playing them, but then that doesn't help the better team because they played such a poor scoring and defensive team on the other side of the field. So with that, let's take a jump before we have to go here in the next 15, 20 minutes. Let's take a jump into AF1 and the NAL. AF1, I think the Albany Firebirds, in my opinion, would be the top team. They're up there at the Kentucky Barrels. We'll see how the season shakes out, who finishes, if any teams end up folding. But I think Albany comes out on top there. Nashville, they seem to be doing much better. I covered them when they were in Nashville before their move to Clarksville a little bit. And I think that's going to be a very interesting matchup. I mean, Nashville and Albany, I think, are probably the top two teams in that league. Just looking at the scores and who they play and how much they've improved in the past year. Albany's also, though, dealt with losing some talent to the UFL, so there's that as well. But then going into the NAL, jumping in there is I think that's kind of a glorified CIF at this point. Southwest Kansas 5-0, Pueblo an expansion team at 5-1, Salina 3-1, Sioux City 3-2, and then the Colorado Spartans at 3-3, Dallas Bulls, one of the newer team at 2-2. Before you have one of the other newer teams, Louisiana Rougarou at 1-4. Amarillo, they've kind of been around the sport a bit, rebranded and all that. The Warbirds are at 1-5. And the sad thing is, seeing this, the Omaha Beef are 0-5, and that is really not like them. Granted, they've lost a lot of talent. One guy went to Fishers after last season, and they've had to change their coaching staff. But Omaha is something to keep an eye on. I would hope I mean, they're a dynasty franchise. They're an iconic team. They've had a lot of success. As a fan, you would hope that they would bounce back after this season, but um, hopefully there's not too much turmoil going on there. Matt, did you have another league you maybe want to talk about that's seemingly more impressive than a lot of people think? There are rumors here and there. I know people on our staff are a little bit hesitant to talk about them, but and I think maybe that's also because of the attendance issues at times, um, and just kind of being a unique name. But I think the management, from what I've seen, seems okay.
It's I always got to be careful when I talk about this league, just because when you have too many connections, you hear too many things that aren't on the record, so you can't you
Yeah.
can't be like, oh hey, this and this. But let's talk about the International Arena League. They had their first couple of games. Obviously, you had Glasgow win their first game. That was the first international game. But then you had a couple of American matchups, and from my understanding, and especially I wanted to double check it, I wanted to fact check it. You do even currently have the Vegas Pennsylvania game, that was streamed. It also had a preview on their YouTube channel. It's right here, and that one Pennsylvania walks out of there with a win, but they did not stream the Utah game where they hosted Cincinnati. And that one, obviously, because of social media, I was able to see the final play and even though I hate saying this, but Utah had a fantastic comeback late, and they won basically off the final play. And Cincinnati is actually going to be the first opponent for the team that I am primarily covering, which we'll get to in a second. But you know, I have heard why the game in Utah wasn't streamed, and I think that's if that's true, it's really dumb. And it's like, hey, if you want visibility, you have to stream your games, and that's just it. I don't really care to hear any sort of uh, excuses. You need to stream your games, and
Yeah.
to my knowledge, I also did not stream the Europe game, so I'm so conflicted on this league because I want it to do well.
Yeah.
But, every single good thing you hear one thing that's not so good or one thing that's kind of annoying or strange or something like that. And, that's why I'm just kind of like, I am very apprehensive. However, thus far, they have at least kicked off. They did more than the Arizona Bandits did. They've at least kicked off some football games, and the league hasn't gone under yet. And there is at least one game that was fully streamed and still available to watch: Las Vegas Rockers versus Pennsylvania Benjamins. So there, the one thing that makes me uncomfortable, and I don't really care if this ruffles feathers. I love the idea of having exclusive coverage. I do not want to be the only method for which you can watch Juggernauts games, like
Yeah.
or see Juggernauts footage. So it's like, hey, I don't care what the reasoning is. Make sure you're streaming your games. But anyway, so then leading up to this week's matchup, and I did get to talk to Coach Jay Allen. I am gonna cross promote just a little bit. I'll have a preview up later on my personal outlet. But Arizona Juggernauts at Cincinnati Stingers, who just came off that loss in Utah, and Arizona, big arena football market.
Yep.
And this is a team that has been making some moves. They're going to be playing at Mullet Arena. They're making some noise. They're hoping to take a bite out of this Valley Arena football market. I need to see what they can actually bring on the field, because if you do not go out there and win game one, it's almost a little unfair, but like you basically need to be a top 2 team in the league or top 3 team in the league to be able to compete with the history we have here.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is I also wonder if they'd be a stronger league if they didn't have European teams. Just because it's like, okay, you have all this money, but why are you spending it in Europe when maybe you should try to focus it more on the region or at least on the US? Pennsylvania will survive. Whether they end up in a higher league, which would not shock me knowing that owner, maybe they end up in the, I'm not saying the AAL is a higher league, but who knows if they maybe end up in the NAL, just knowing that owner and his past. And then Arizona, like you said, they have a lot of challenge out there. The challenges with the other teams in that market, all in the IFL. But then you also have the Utah team in Cincinnati. Now, Cincinnati may or may not be competing a full season with the Kentucky Barrels, but you also look at Utah. They have that market exclusive, and hopefully have start a rivalry kind of with the Arizona franchise. So you look at that. I just wonder if they should maybe stick to the US and the strong markets they have and use that money for streaming. And like you said, maybe have I don't know, maybe they have a YouTube channel that they stream games on. But I just think that they need to figure out a way to be a little bit more financially savvy and have a way for fans to have more access to their games and maybe even advertise. I've not even seen much advertising online.
And I definitely disagree with most of their advertising strategy. And I can tell you, not very many people think their advertising has been at all effective. And I do just want to just piggyback off something you said. It's not saying the IAL is a lower league. It's they are unproven. As of
Right.
right now, we do not know if they are a CIF level, AFL 1.0 level, AFL 2.0 level. We have literally no idea what actual breed of competition long term or business savvy or stability. And so far, all we can do is look at what we have. And what we have is a successful first week of games where only one of them was actually widely available to watch.
Hmm.
And that's something that I don't care if that ruffles feathers and whatever else you need to consider when you're launching a league, because if it's going to work, you need to actually make it work. And on your point about the, focusing on the US, I almost think it should be the opposite. And obviously, I'm grateful to have more teams in Arizona, more teams to cover. I mean, there was a point in time where I didn't know if I was going to be able to cover an arena football game again. So, Juggernauts being here helps out a lot in that regard. So, I am appreciative of that. However, the American market for arena football has been decimated by ego and poor financial
Yeah.
decisions, and we're not filling up NHL arenas anymore. And way too many teams keep going to smaller and smaller arenas. I think I'd have to actually sit down and look at every single team, but considering how many teams drop every year, it's hard to follow. I would be surprised if 30% of the teams in all of these North American leagues played in 10,000 plus capacity stadiums, because it's just, for whatever reason, we keep going smaller and smaller, which makes the product more niche, which means less money is flowing in, which means it's going to keep getting smaller. So for the IAL, if you really had that vision of going international, part of me wonders if it would have been better to just do a European league and then either let the American leagues figure it out and actually, I also stand by this. The IFL, NAL, and AF1 need to just merge. We need
I wish.
one big, strong league, and then the IAL could have came in later after they had 5 years of an established product in Europe and had the two leagues collaborate.
I think I have a couple of talking points I want to go on here as our minutes wind down, but I think on the topic of that, the merger and all that, I don't think the IFL ever really merged with anybody. However, I look at the AF1 and the NAL. That's where I see a possibility if the egos would allow it. Unfortunately, I don't think it will. I think the AF1 is a good business model, even though a team or two might fold here or there. Um, and those are the two leagues that I would merge. And then on the topic of the IAL, great, you want to go international. Hear me out. Don't go to Europe. Go north of the border. Because up in Canada, there are a lot of those mid-major arenas. You look at major junior hockey playing in, I don't know, four to, let's say, 7,000 seat buildings. And so you put them in there, you go up to, I don't know, Oshawa. I think Hamilton's building's a little bigger. Maybe you go up to Halifax, Brandon, Manitoba. I mean, just go up to those sort of areas. Maybe the Ontario and Manitoba and a little bit in a Quebec. And so I think those are maybe the international markets to focus on, and then going mixing in with the ones south of the border a little bit there. Europe, I think, is a possibility, but I think it's hard when you also have teams in the US and those cross-pond flights. So that's how I would market it internationally, and maybe like we've seen the NAL do, go down to Mexico City or Monterrey. But I would stay in the North American, borderline South American region if it's me.
Honestly, I don't hate that idea. And while my goal or my end game would always be to essentially reform the original AFL, like one major league, and that's where everything's coming out of. NAL, AF1, and even if there's a couple other smaller leagues that have like 4 or 5 teams each, get one or two of those, you can have a legitimate competitor for the IFL if that all happened. Unfortunately, it's just never going to happen because how niche the sport is and how the egos have ruined it, and it sucks
Mhm.
because it's when you actually learn how arena football works, you're like, man, I really wish I was just a fan still, because you just want to enjoy the product. And hopefully we at least provide more than enough talking about the actual product and not just complaining about the other stuff.
Right.
But I love the Mexico idea, and you know, I would say either the IAL should have just been in Europe for 5 or so years to build up brands, or you could have your American markets, but yeah, go north of the border, go south of the border. I believe Don't quote me on this because this is going off of memory from when I was first hearing about the IAAL and looking at their original website. I believe there were plans for Canada. I don't know if anything like happened there, but it's something that they definitely should revisit. But you got to
Mhm.
get through season one first.
Yeah. And the other market I look at is Billings, Montana. They've had a history of teams. Does the league go there? I mean, that would be a good regional rivalry three-way pairing with Arizona and the Salt Lake franchise too. So I think there are some markets that need tapped back into as well. But I think right now they got to focus on kind of their streaming and making sure that they are financially afloat. But that's really all I have on those topics.
Yeah, and I completely agree because again, you know me, I want this to work. I want arena football to be big again. I want when the Coyotes come back to Arizona, I want an arena football team and hopefully lacrosse playing out of that arena and filling
Yeah.
out that stadium. So it's like, I want this to work. You really like, this is speaking directly to all the business types, especially at most of these leagues. You seriously need to make sure your strategy is on point because if people aren't watching your games, like imagine being a Cincinnati fan, you didn't even get to watch your team's first ever game unless you traveled. How many miles is it from Cincinnati to Salt Lake?
I don't know. It's probably over 1,000, probably over 1,500.
So it's like it just even just like a preservation perspective. Imagine 10 years down the line, Cincinnati is still thriving. Let's say the IAL is doing phenomenally. You don't have footage of the original game. I don't care if it sounds petty. Come on, dog. You got to do better than that.
Yeah, and the other thing is with rumors of instability in AF1 at times with a certain franchise, do we combine Kentucky and Cincinnati? I mean, you also look at that, you look at those markets, they're so close to each other. Cincinnati and where Kentucky plays, there's all that separates them is a river. Matt, they're in the same city almost.
Is it basically kind of like a Kansas City deal where it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
you're technically two different states, but come on,
yeah.
you're one city?
Uh-huh.
That's it's so strange because it also part of me feels like on one hand that is oversaturating a market and like competing with yourself. I know it's teams that are in two different leagues, but like you know what I mean. Same
Yeah,
sport, so, same audience. The other side of me is like if they were both in the same league, you could market that as a rivalry
exactly.
because like all these regions, like there's a lot of regions, especially like on the East Coast, the Midwest. I almost called it the Middle West for some reason. I don't travel very much outside of my Pacific Coast, but or the Midwest, where it's like so many of these regions, these teams are so close to each other that they actually form rivalries that have two fan bases that kind of thrive, and you're not actually splitting the market, you're actually properly feeding the two different markets. But then you have other examples where it's like you have two teams that are too close and or playing outside of the same building in Southern California, and it's like,
Uh-huh.
how are you actually going to do this? So, in your opinion, the Cincinnati Kentucky thing, would you consider that more of a that could be a phenomenal rivalry, or more of a that's eating into the same market?
I think it's eating into the same market a little bit. You look at baseball, you have the Cincinnati Reds, and then right across the river in the Kentucky area, you have the Florence Yalls, or I think they have a new name now, but in an independent league. And I don't know what that market thinks. I mean, I know the area of Kentucky is also pretty populated. I mean, the main airport's actually not even in Cincy. But just to wrap things up with our time running out, that issue needs figured out.
I
So
agree, but it's also a bigger problem with just how a lot of it operates, and unfortunately, it's going to take too much time for
yeah,
it all to actually come together.
exactly. But I think we've had a lot of good conversation, and to everybody else, we'll catch you next episode.